This lesson is going to focus on solving quadratics using the quadratic formula. If you'd like to take a moment and write down the learning target and then hit play when you're ready to continue. Here's the quadratic formula. We start with taking the standard form of the equation, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, and solving it for x. That means moving everything over to the right side, and that's how we get the quadratic formula. So please take a moment and write this down in your notebook, as it is going to be important for this lesson and future algebra lessons that deal with quadratics, including algebra 2 and so on. Now this is red, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. I'll show you how that works here in a minute. Our first example is going to be a simple one here. All right, and remember, in the form ax squared, plus bx plus c equals 0, I've got to identify all of my a, b's, and c's. So again, my a is going to be equal to a positive 1, my b is going to be equal to a negative 4, and my c is going to be equal to a positive 3. And we set that equation equal to 0 if it's not already, and then we just plug these into the formula. So this first one here is going to be, this is how you plug these in. Negative b. So we've got to take a negative. Remember, when we're substituting in your formula, put everything into a parenthesis for the variable. So it's a negative 4, because a negative b equals negative 4, I'm putting in parentheses, plus or minus the square root of b squared. Again, we're substituting in b, got to put it in parentheses. B is 4, b squared, minus 4 times a is going to be equal to 1, and c is going to be equal to 3, all over 2 times a, which is 1. That's how we substitute everything into the formula. Now we're going to simplify. This negative 4 becomes a positive 4, plus or minus my negative 4 squared. Okay, negative 4 times negative 4 is going to give me a 16, minus 4 times 1 is 4, 4 times 3 is 12. We have our 12, and then 2 times 1 is 2. Again, continuing to simplify at this point. I'm going to keep moving down. We have 4 plus or minus the square root. 16 minus 12 is going to give us 4, all over 2. Okay, at this point, I'm just going to move up over here on the paper so we can see all our work at the same time. So 4 plus or minus, now the square root of 4 is 2. So I write my 2 there, all divided by 2. Now here's where we've got two different problems. Kind of like the way we did solving absolute value equations. We need to split this into 2. Okay, this is why this plus or minus is here. We've got 4 plus 2 divided by 2, and then we have 4 minus 2 divided by 2. And now we have our two answers. 4 plus 2 is 6, 6 divided by 2. 4 minus 2 is 2, 2 divided by 2 is 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3, and 2 divided by 2 is 1. So x is going to equal 3, or x is going to equal 1. Now coming over here to Desmos, I had actually plugged this into Desmos to graph it, and if you look, our x-intercepts are 1 and 3, as we have proven here by 1 and 3. We can also solve this equation by factoring, and I'll show you that here in a second. As we go back up to the original equation here, we have x squared minus 4x plus 3 equals 0. Again, I'm going to factor it. And at this point, I know that I'm looking for factors of 3, because that's positive, that add together to 4. Well, that's easy. It's going to be 1 and 3. But these add together, and I've got a negative b, so now we've got two negative numbers. So my factoring is going to be x minus 1 times x minus 3. If I do x minus 1 equals 0 and x minus 3 equals 0, I'm going to add 1 to both sides. This becomes x equals 1. Add 3 to both sides. This becomes x equals 3. Again, I could solve it by graphing, factoring, or the quadratic formula. And you're going to have to make a choice coming up on tests and assignments of which way you want to solve that. Our second problem is where we're going to encounter a difficulty, and I'll show you that here in a minute. Again, when I use Desmos to check my answers, you might not have that, or your instructor, your teacher might tell you to go ahead and solve it without using the graphing calculator. In that case, you're going to have to use the quadratic formula or factor it on your own. Alright, so the first step is going to be identifying our A, our B, and our C. I look over here, my A is positive 1, my B is a negative 2, and my C is a positive 2. At that point, we put these into the quadratic formula. You can try and factoring it. You're not going to be able to, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. So let's show this by putting this in the quadratic formula. Negative b. So again, I have a negative. Again, substitute my b in parentheses. Negative 2 plus or minus the square root of b squared. Again, negative 2 squared minus 4 times a is equal to 1 and c is equal to 2. All over 2 times 1. Again, direct substitutions first. If you don't do this, you're more than likely going to make a mistake with a negative sign or some part of your arithmetic. So now we simplify our first substitution here. Negative 2 is going to give us a positive 2. Plus or minus, again, we have our square root. Negative 2 times negative 2 is going to give us a 4 minus 4 times 1 is 4 and 4 times 2 is 8. All over 2 times 1 is 2. Again, we're going to simplify this here. And I'm going to simplify it over here to my right. 2 plus or minus 4 minus 8 is going to give us a negative 4 over 2. Now at this point in Algebra 1, we can understand this has no real solutions because you cannot have a square root of a negative number without going to an imaginary number. And I want to show you what it looks like on Desmos. So let's go ahead and get Desmos back up here and go ahead and type this one in. X squared minus 2x plus 2. If you see this parabola, this red parabola, never touches the x-axis. So this has no real solutions. They have imaginary solutions, and you'll be talking about those in your upper level algebra classes. But for our purposes here, this parabola does not intersect the x-axis, therefore it has no real solutions. So if you want to determine if it's going to have a real solution or not, you can use what we call the discriminant, which is this under the square root sign, b squared minus 4ac. If you use the discriminant and find out the discriminant is negative, but without having to do any of this work, just do the discriminant, and then if it's negative, you have no real solutions. The rest of the problems we're going to encounter have solutions, and I want to point out the different types of solutions you're going to get. The numbers are not always going to come out even. They're not always going to be in good decimal form or fractional form. They might still have square roots left. So we're going to encounter those now. And again, I'm going to stop the video, substitute everything in, and have the problem worked out so that you can look at it, taking it step by step and not writing as I go along. So go ahead and pause the video, take a moment to write down number 3 if you need to. Make sure you have the quadratic formula, and go ahead and work it out, or wait until I work it out and then work it out on your own to get some practice. When you're ready to see the answer and work through it, go ahead and hit play again. Okay, step 1 is to find out your A and your B and your C. A is 1, B is 4, C is 1, and then directly substitute them in. And then I'm going to have the complete answers here. Okay, the next step is to simplify. We end up with a radical 12 under here. 16 minus 4 is 12. Now, we can simplify this radical into square root of 12 is also equal to square root of 4 times 3, or we can choose the decimal route, and I'll go both routes here in a minute. Now I simplify this 12 to a 4 times 3. 4 is a perfect square, so I can pull that one out, and I have negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 times the square root of 3. This is going to become 2 radical 3 all over 2. Sorry. And then I can divide each one of these by 2 and simplify it, getting rid of the denominator. So negative 4 divided by 2 is going to give me a negative 2 plus or minus 2 divided by 2 is 2, radical 3. So my answer, if I want to leave it in radicals, depending on what your instructor wants you to do, is going to be a negative 2 plus or minus radical 3. I'm going to choose to do the decimal form here in 1 second, but I've got to split these into 2 equations. Negative 4 plus radical 12 divided by 2, and negative 4 minus radical 12, all divided by 2. Now remember your order of operations here. If you don't, it's going to cause quite a few problems. And we're going to find the square root of 12. So we find the square root of 12 is going to be 3.46410. So over here, we're going to estimate that to negative 4 plus 3.464. 3.464 divided by 2. Now I have to take that and subtract it. We've got or the negative 4 minus 3.464 divided by 2. So first of all, I have to take my negative 4 plus 3.464 equals negative 5.36 divided by 2 gives me a negative 0.268. Then we do the other route. We do a negative 4 minus this time 3.464 equals that divided by 2 is going to give us a negative 3.732. And just double checking in Desmos, again, there are my roots or my zeros, negative 3.732 and a negative 0.268. Those are my x-intercepts or my solutions to this quadratic using the formula. And our simplified version over here, if you wanted to find the square root of 3 and then take negative 2 plus the square root of 3, negative 2 minus the square root of 3, you're going to get the same answers. And of course, rounding radical 3 to 1.732, just to the nearest thousandth. Moving on to number 4, I wrote down my A is equal to 1, my B is equal to 6, my C is equal to 9. This looks like it's factorable. And it could be, but we're going to plug it into the quadratic formula. Here's the first part of my math, the substitution, the simplification down to the radical symbol. Go ahead and pause here if you need to, and then continue when you want to finish, because I'm going to move the paper up. Negative 6 plus 0 is still negative 6, and negative 6 minus 0 is still negative 6. So this time we don't have to split anything because we're adding and subtracting 0. And so negative 6 divided by 2 is going to give us x equals 3. Now this only has one solution, and you're going to see why here in a second. Because as I punch this into Desmos, x squared plus 6x plus 9, it just gives me one x-intercept. That is where the vertex is. That's hits it in one spot. This was our first one, which gives us our others. We already looked at that. And that's why this one only has one solution. Okay, for our next two, we're finally going to look at a fractional or one that comes out with a decimal that doesn't get too hard. And then I'm going to show you how to do one where it's not quite set up properly. So go ahead and take this, identify your A, B, and C. And go ahead, I'm going to do it in parts so I can move this up and show you the answers. So go ahead and hit resume when you're ready, but go ahead and give this a try. Your A is going to be 2, your B is going to be 3, and your C is going to be a -5. Here's the first substitution, the first simplification, second simplification. Now I just need to do 9 plus 40. I've got the square root of 49 now. So now I'm going to move this up and continue simplifying. And continue on out. Square root of 49 becomes 7. So I got 3 plus 7, or 3, -3 minus 7, all divided by 4. And my solutions are going to be 1 or -2.5. Go ahead and pause it if you need to, double check your math, and then hit play when you're ready to do the next problem. Okay, sorry about having to split the video. I accidentally hit stop and didn't want to record the whole last 15 minutes. So when you've got this here, we need to solve for 0. Now, you can put, it doesn't matter which side these are going to be on. If you want to put the x squared and keep it positive and keep it on this side and bring the 2x over, you're going to subtract 2x from both sides. And then you have 0 equals x squared minus 2x minus 4. If you wanted to pull the x squared over here, then you're going to add x squared to both sides and add 4 to both sides and keep it as 0. Either way, you're going to come out with the same answers. I'm going to choose to keep the x positive. Now, the parabolas are going to look different. With a negative x, it's going to open downward, and a positive x is going to go upward. But I'll show you here in Desmos, if you chose to do it either way, you're going to get the same answers. So I'm going to rewrite this here, x squared minus 2x minus 4 equals 0. Identify my A, my B, and my C. My A is going to be equal to 1, my B is a -2, and my C is a -4. Again, the first substitution here, then the first simplification, and then my 4 minus a -16 is going to give me 4 plus 16. Again, pause it if you need to check the math. As I move this up, I'm going to continue with the simplification process. Looks like it's time to get my allergy shots. Well, okay, let's go ahead and continue. Go ahead and simplify this and come up with your answers. Go ahead and hit pause or play when you're ready. Okay, converting the radical 20 here to 4.472. Again, rounding it to the nearest thousandth. Plugging that in, I got 2 plus 4.472 or 2 minus 4.472, all divided by 2. Simplifying, moving up, and I have x is equal to a 3.236 or a -1.236. Again, just double checking this in Desmos, I can come up and punch that into Desmos and see, again, my -1.236 and my 3.236. Now I put both in here because this is the one we worked on, the red one's the one we showed on, and if you would have pushed everything over to the left side and made it negative, it would have become the blue pointing downward parabola, but again, your x-intercepts are going to be the same. And now for our last one, our last example. Again, we don't have everything on the left or right side of the equation, so my first step is to subtract 7 from both sides, getting x squared minus 6x minus 7 equals 0. Identifying my A, B, and C. Now again, I can look at this and see if I can factor it. Do I have factors of 7? Now it's a -c. When I subtract those factors or find the difference, I get a -6. Absolutely. I've got 7 and 1 are my factors, and I got a -7 and a +1, which is going to tell me that by setting these equal to 0, my x is going to equal 7, or my x is going to equal a -1. But again, this would be simpler to do than plugging it in, but some people are formula people. They don't like the factoring and they want to plug it in. So if you want to use the quadratic formula on this one, this is your chance. You know what the answer should be right here. But go ahead, find your A, B, and C, plug that in, and then Continue when you're ready, and we'll do it in steps with our first substitution. Okay, A is equal to 1, B is equal to a -6, and C is equal to -7. So go ahead and plug those into the formula, and check back with me after you hit play. Go ahead and pause. So the first part of the math, the first substitution, the first simplification. Now moving down, go ahead and pause it again and continue to simplify and split them into two different equations. Okay, 36 plus 28 equals 64. That's going to be the square root of 64 is 8. So now split those into two separate equations and solve. And we've got 7 and -1, which matches what we had up here when we factored it. And again, double checking on Desmos confirms it's at -1 and a 7, so that you know that you did the math correctly. And that concludes the second part of the lesson. Again, sorry for splitting this up into two videos, but they're shorter. All right, have a good afternoon.